Cool. Hey.
Hey, Ben McCulloch.
That's right.
Did I say your
Hey,
name
Ahmed.
correctly?
Yeah, Ben McCulloch. That's
Ben
right.
McCulloch. Welcome to Lingofest. Thank you for making the time. I love the background there.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's actually where I grew up. It doesn't usually look like that. The weather is usually a lot worse because it's the west coast of Scotland. So I grew up on this island, which is Bute, and that in the background is, if I can point right, Arran, which is a better known island, a bigger island, but the one I come from, I would say, is better because
So you grew up in an island. That's an interesting. So how big is the island?
it's tiny. It's 20 kilometers long by I think 7 wide, and the population, it changes, but when I was a kid I think it was about 7,000 people, so 1 high school and 3 primary schools.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, wherever we live, that's basically about the perimeter where we hang around.
Yeah, sure.
Like 95% of the time we are within that perimeter, So when somebody says, I live in a small city, I'm like, I live in a small city too, even though it's DC. I don't live in DC. I live in my neighborhood. That's what I live.
Yeah,
I
I
have my
get you.
store, and there's the school for my son. And, I take walks in the neighborhood, and, maybe once in a while we have an excursion to somewhere else, and could be the big city and all. But that could be, I mean, it's really interesting to live in an island. What is the difference between living in an island and living in let's call it somewhere else that's not an island, like where you're surrounded with water? Does that make any difference?
Yeah, definitely. I've lived in quite a few places after I left Butte, basically when I finished school. And the small community, I think, it becomes its own little bubble in a way that, within a city, okay, you have your network, which are kind of the people who you have some sort of relationship with, but still you're influenced by everything else that's going on. But within a small community like Butte, the island where I grew up, it really sort of it becomes very clearly defined. You feel like you know everybody, even if you've not spoken to them. You see the same faces every day, and personalities kind of, like somebody, like I was very into music and I played in a band. So, with my friends from the same community, we became the local band and we became known as that. Like we were the young musicians who wanted to be rock stars. And you kind of get pegged in a way that I think in a bigger community, you can be more anonymous. People might not be so aware of what you're up to or what your interests are. But in a small community like that, it's really amplified. And I think it can be very good in some ways, that you really feel part of something. And any events, it's always the same people that are there, so you get to know them in different contexts. But also it can be bad because in terms of rumors, rumors can get also amplified in a way that somebody invents something about someone else and then it gets taken as truth regardless of whether it is or not.
It's that big tension between the pluses and minuses of living in a community. Like in a big city, like for example, I don't like it when somebody knows, like I go to Starbucks, for example, right? They're like, hey, usual, not the usual. It feels like, I wish you didn't know me so I can be whatever I want to be. I want to be myself, or I want to be something else, or I want to try something new, whatever. But at the same time, there's definitely value in living in a community. So that tension between constraint that you get because of familiarity, and then the freedom that you get when you are in a place where things are completely. That's why I think we like to take trips, right? So we go to a place where nobody knows us, so we can be a new version of ourselves in a way. Right?
Yeah, totally.
So there are pluses and minuses, of course, in everything. And so you are part of a band, right?
Yeah.
Were you a drummer? I'm assuming you were the drummer.
That's right.
I saw on your LinkedIn that you're Are you you're an instructor or coach or whatever you call that?
Yeah, I was a tutor.
Tutor.
Yeah, I funnily enough got into drums for the worst reason possible, which was the school band was going on a trip to Germany. And I was like, I want some of that. I want to go on this trip. And they didn't have enough drummers. So I joined. But so that was the concert band playing like film scores and stuff like that, like the kind of stuff that they could put on concerts for all the parents. But within that band, two of my friends, who are still like my closest friends, were learning guitar and bass. So we formed a band and I played drums, and I got really into, pop music, like crazy about David Bowie and Red Hot Chili Peppers and various bands. And it was kind of my obsession, I would say. Really, I'm nearly 40 now, and that was from my teens up until about 30. I just lived and breathed music. It was what I wanted to do all the time. And so yeah, I was in a band and we played quite a lot of concerts. We wrote music, recorded it, and always had this hope of, becoming like a big successful band, which never happened, but still, I learned a lot from it along the way. It's all sorts of things. I think when you're in a small band, you really have to take care of everything. So I wouldn't really consider myself an entrepreneur, because it's not something that I've really pursued. But at that time, you sort of had to think in that way of like, how to promote the concerts, how to make it financially viable, thinking long term, because usually bands don't make any money at the start. They get into huge debt and then try and pull themselves out of it, which is really more of a game of luck than anything else. There's many great bands who don't ever make the money back. So yeah, it was really a fascinating time, and I studied music at college. I did a degree in music performance, so focused on drums, and there I learned about world music. Most of my studies were on Brazilian music, so I was playing in a samba band. We played at festivals and so on. And in my final year, I did a project on, do you know Brazilian tropicalia music?
No.
No, it's amazing. It's really some of the most incredible stuff. If you like the Beatles at all, are you a fan of the Beatles? Yeah. Well, this is from the same era, like late 60s. And they were also fans of the Beatles, but, being Brazilians within that culture, they kind of channeled a lot of their influences. And there was also the military dictatorship at the time, so a lot of their songs, they couldn't speak explicitly, but they were talking about what was going on. And one of the really fascinating things that I think kind of gives an interesting perspective on some of the discussions now is that they were influenced by a movement called cultural cannibalism, where it was like, let's steal everything, absolutely explicitly steal from any culture and just make it our own, and not be ashamed that we're stealing, like, let's just take it all. And I think it gives an interesting lens on the discussions now about not stealing from other cultures. And I think in music, this kind of thing is happening all the time, because it's so easy to, like, hear a drum rhythm. Like, I love Fela Kuti. So if I hear Tony Allen, then I might want to play what Tony Allen, Fela Kuti's drummer, played. And then someone could say, okay, you're stealing from Nigerian music. But then I know that Fela Kuti was massively influenced by American funk and jazz and all sorts. So, as well as, of course,
I mean, what does
African.
that mean, to steal? I mean, to be honest with you, why would somebody say, "Oh, you're stealing"? Because I think that's the wrong word, right? I mean, you're simply continuing the cross pollination of all the various cultures that interact with each other constantly. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, sure, totally. I totally get you. I think you're basically just becoming part of the conversation if
Right?
you take what's been said before and say it in your own way, and then someone else comes along and does the same to what you've done, and it just keeps on going.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Is that tropic? Can you say it again? Tropicalian?
mhm.
Okay. Is it the name of
Tropicalia. Um,
Tropicalia? Is it the name of a group or a movement or a type of music?
that's Yeah, that's the movement. I'm probably going to mispronounce the names, but there's famous artists like Caetano Veloso and Gilberto Gil, and there's an amazing band, very Beatlesy in a Brazilian way, called Os Mutantes. And maybe that's the best place to start. They're incredible. It's just like such fun, brilliant music. And because it, was such an interesting movement, there's been quite a lot of books written about it. So if you want to get into it, you can get really deep.
I'll definitely, I'm definitely all about discovering new music, for sure. Wonderful.
Sure.
And so, as a, I'm going to continue talking a little bit about drums and being part of a band.
Sure.
And then we'll segue into what you're doing today. So are you guys, as a band, are you still performing, or are you disbanded, so to speak, or?
Oh, totally disbanded. Yeah, it's the band originally was called Chi Weapon, and there's still some videos on YouTube, now pretty old. And we, oh God, when was it? It's like basically before I came to Prague, it was all just kind of grinding to a halt. And it was always hard because you sort of have to just dive in with both feet and not really consider the consequences. But of course, people have to consider the consequences because you have to keep making a living. And some of the band already had kids, and it's like,
exactly.
yeah. So it stopped.
My point is, and I always like to make this point, and then we'll move on. My point is that we have this notion that all right, if you want to become a musician or you want to play music, you need to either go and make a living out of it, or you abandon it, right? And then same with art, same with writing fiction, same with poetry, same with with whatever, right?
Yeah.
So we have all these. I mean, we all of us. I think every single human being has an artistic impulse to express themselves somehow. And it could be in one of the given disciplines, or it could be something totally different. It could be that they like to, I don't know, they take machete and what do you call it, papier mâché, and papier mâché, and they do some weird thing with it, or some totally right, a new way of just expressing yourself.
Creativity.
That is artistic, right?
Yeah.
And then we sort of stifle that because we need to make a living.
Yeah.
And I think hopefully we're getting into a world or a phase in our evolution as a species, so to speak, where we can make a living, but we have enough time to pursue this passion continuously, right? Not to make a living, but to be fulfilled, right? And so I like to make that point. So for instance, I have two brothers that are younger than me, and we're like 2 years. So I have somebody younger by 2, and then the other one is younger by 4, right? So we're pretty close in terms of age. And so we grew up making music, the 3 of us, right?
Cool.
As a band, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And so we had all this stuff going on, and I mean, we were not trained musicians. We just knew how to create a song, and we were always creating songs. And then as we grew, and we have to make living and all that, so we sort of stayed as brothers. Obviously, we are very close, but we stopped making the music. And then I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I went back to we recorded all these things that we did, like cassettes, right? So we had lyrics and we had the harmony and all that.
Great.
And then so we hired these professional musicians to take all those songs and turn them into an album.
Okay.
Right? And they did, and I'll send you a link to it. And I was like, I guarantee you, there's a lot of people out there who are not aware that there is a gig economy. There are artists out there who are willing and able to do these things. Let's say, for example, I wanted to be a cartoonist, but I'm not a good cartoonist. I don't draw, but I have a lot of ideas, right? I could partner with a cartoonist and say, here's what I would like to do. And I could do that for me, right? And could express myself. Anyway, the point really, and I always like to make this point to the audience, is don't give up on your passion. It's not either or, right? You can still do music, you can still draw, whatever. And you can partner with folks who are sort of like professional. That's what they do. Even if you're not a perfect you don't play the guitar, but you know how to create songs, or you have lyrics, or you have a hum, and you want to turn that into a song, or whatever, right? Be creative, open your mind, and reach out and engage, and there's and imagine if all of us are able to do that. I think we'd be happier for sure.
Yeah,
What do you think?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Having this outlet, it makes a huge difference. You know, even now, I always am writing music. If I get an idea, it
Right.
will haunt me. So I sing it into my phone, or I
Yeah.
get out the keyboard and I record it into the computer, and then it's logged. And usually that's enough. It's like it's out, and
Yep.
I expressed it, and I can listen to it anytime I want. But yeah, it's same with lyrics. I was always writing them, and now I'm quite into writing fiction for the satisfaction of getting ideas out,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just
and
like
there are, and the
practicing.
thing is, if you write fiction, there are outlets out there where you can publish your work, right?
Hmm.
So we reach out and do that. And again, it's I think, happiness, in my opinion, is being able to have meaning in your life, right? And meaning
Yeah,
often is all about expressing yourself, being able to, give something out there, and that is part of who you are. Um, well, I think the good news is that you and I and folks who are in the audio conversational world are doing something that we do love to do,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's not like we go
totally.
to the office and we're like, taking care of billing for, not that that is a bad thing, right? If you have a passion for it,
It's
um,
part of it.
it's part of it, right? But being able to build these voice bots and do the things that we do, I think we're pretty lucky, especially given that the space is in an interesting space, and it's a
Very,
forward-looking space.
yeah,
So let me ask you: you describe yourself as, and I'm going to quote you, as a conversation designer with audio superpowers. What does that
yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I know. Well, what it means is I was trying to find the shortest way to summarize where I'm coming from. But to now that you've given me the chance to expand, essentially, I'm a conversation designer. That's where I've focused my efforts now. But I'm coming from, over a decade of experience working with audio. And specifically, most of the time I was working with voice. So I think this puts me, now I would say the conversational space has expanded beyond designers doing anything, being like jack of all trades. It's starting to be a bit more specialized. And I feel like I'm very, my experience suits me to doing voice bots. Because if somebody wants to consider how to make the voice of the assistant more expressive, then I have a grounding in that. Whereas I think many of the people in the space, like the conversation designers, are coming from a UX background, which gives them fantastic grounding in other areas, but not in expressing with voice. I'm not, I would say I'm a very bad voice talent, but I've worked with so many voice talents that I understand what they're doing, and I've edited their voices to try and make a sort of consistent message and story. And then going beyond, beyond voice, I've designed sound for film and TV and video games. So I think that area, I'm always trying to push it, and it feels like I don't get why people aren't embracing the sonic element of conversational design yet. It really feels like the focus is still on very good things like researching the use case and so on. But then when it comes to actually designing the thing, it's still very like word centric. It's still like we start with the words, then we implement those, we perfect the words, we iterate. And it's like, that's brilliant because of course that is a massive part of it. But how those words are expressed and how you even frame them with other sounds like ear cons. And I think even ear cons are just the start of what we could be doing. I think, it's a sonic medium. If we're talking about voice bots, obviously not chatbots and so on, but voice bots, it's a sonic medium and there's so much we could be doing. So that's why I call myself conversation designer with audio superpowers, because I want to be the person that people think of when they want to embrace these other possibilities beyond just making a sonic experience out of what could essentially be a text-based chatbot.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think my, if I can rephrase what I understood, um, what you're saying, I think, uh, is audio is sort of an afterthought, right? To many of
It
these
feels like that.
designers, right?
Yeah.
I think to the extent that they do some text to speech prosody, right? So it ends with a question or emphasis. Okay, yeah. But there's much more, right? I think there's much
Yeah.
more to it than that. Um, and I think there's a thing that you and I agree on, which is that folks are not as creative as they could and should be with what sound offers them by way um, of a a tool. I mean, sound is. I mean, you can do so much with sound, and yet it is underutilized. And one of the reasons is we focus too much on conversation. Like, okay, it's this is what they say, all right, and this is what happens when something goes wrong, and this is how it happens when you're phrasing it to a power user. So all kinds of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And these folks, I think it could be that they are coming in to it not from an audio background, but from perhaps, I don't know, a chat background or linguistics. Not, I mean, linguistics has within it phonetics, obviously, but
Yep.
linguistics in the sense of, discourse analysis and so forth, where audio is not central. So that I think if you were to construct, I don't know, let's say a program, let's say a 1-year certificate program for conversational design, I think crucial to it would be understanding audio, understanding sound, understanding
Yeah.
how to use music. I mean, music, for example, it has, you can convey a lot of emotion. I couldn't watch a movie really without music, right? It would
Yeah.
lose everything almost.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It kind of it beds the emotions of the characters and the stories, and it's yeah. I think there's a few things I would say to what you're saying. Like sound is massively misunderstood in many of the arts where it's a integral component. Like
Hmm.
often I was working on like TV shows or films where the director didn't really get sound. They thought visually, and that's no massive criticism because they have many things to consider in their story making. It's just that if you go and watch a film and it looks fantastic and it sounds terrible, the audience are usually extremely unhappy because they're like,
Yeah.
I can't understand this and it sounds like crap, sounds cheap. If it's the other way around, where it sounds very good, but what you see isn't perhaps such good quality. Like the best example I can think of right now is the Blair Witch Project.
Hmm.
The whole aesthetic visually was that it looked bad because it was supposed to be like handheld camcorders,
Hmm.
but of course the sound mix was nothing like a home movie.
Hmm.
They went to great lengths to make sure that it had the jump scares. It's a horror movie, it needed to have that impact, and you had to understand what people were saying. And these are the things that are very important with something like filmmaking. And quite often you will find that even filmmakers aren't taking sound so seriously. And the other problem is it's very hard to talk about sound. We can both talk about a blue cube, and the two of us are probably going to imagine the same thing. But if I say to you, like, an ear con that signifies a car driving away, I think the two of us could imagine two completely different things, which both signify the same thing, if you know what I mean. And to actually describe that particular movement, the car driving off into the distance, I would have to use a lot of words. And even still, it's like I'm using words to describe sound, and it's still a kind of abstract process where I can hopefully describe it well enough for you, but still we might not be in complete agreement. And this is what you find time and again with sound, that people find it very hard to describe. You know, even with musicians, they often say, like, you know, make it sound more brown, which is something John Lennon used to apparently say. And it's like, I of course don't know what he was actually meaning. And I should point out, I don't think he was meaning it in any kind of racial sense. But it's this kind of shorthand for, you know, as far as I understand it, that was like a retro sound. You know, brown was kind of like Motown, you know, like that sort of, well, for me, it's like kind of distorted. See, I'm even struggling to put it into words.
I understand. I think, for example, if you had this, you had said, I want it to be bright green. I think,
Yeah.
I think I understand what that means, like, as opposed to brown, right? Or
Yeah,
gray. So a
sure.
little bit gray. Gray feels like sad, feels like subdued, whereas bright green feels like in your face, maybe, but still pleasant, maybe. And maybe, you know, if you said, dark red, okay, that's sort of threatening a little bit, maybe, you know. So I can, so
Sure.
I understand what you mean. I mean, expressing sound through word. I mean, there's a whole philosophy out there. It says there are certain things, right, beyond that words cannot express, right? So, for example, whenever we're recruiting for a voice bot and we need a voice for human, sometimes, let's say we did one for kids, and we needed a certain voice, right? And I think we went through about 15 um, auditions, 15 auditions from folks before we said, this is the one. So we didn't
Yeah,
know what it is until we heard it,
that's it.
which is the big problem, right?
Time consuming. It's so time consuming. You know, you find this even in filmmaking. You know, one example, like, you can apply emotion to anything. You can have an angry door. You can have eerie sounding snowshoes, which is an example I would use because there's a very, if you're into sound, there's a very good video series which is free on the net called Soundworks Collection, and it's all interviews with sound teams from film and video games. And I think this is such a good thing to watch because it really, I think, opens up your mind and ears to what's possible with sound. And so they're interviewing the team who did the last James Bond film. And they're talking about, like, before the titles at the start, you have this guy walking across a frozen lake. And I don't know if you've seen it, but a simple scene, just a guy basically pursuing a girl who's trapped in the ice, and he's walking across a frozen lake, and he's got crampons on his boots. And the director said to the sound team, I want those crampons to sound, and this is off the top of my head, it was something like weird or eerie, make them sound odd. So then for the sound team, it's like, okay, that's a completely like banal sound. It's just footsteps. It's just like across the ice. But they had to give it this feeling and energy and emotion. And so they went away and did that. And sound teams are doing this all the time. It's like, give me an angry door. You know, so it's not, and luckily I have a door right here. It's not this, it's this. You know, it's like agitation. You can feel the extra force that's going into it. And I think in terms of these voice experiences, obviously we don't want angry doors, but we can create something that perhaps evokes the brand. We can evoke the emotion of the brand. Like if it's some kind of spa resort, then it can, you know, you can entice the user from the outset by giving them a feeling of what it's like to be in that resort, even in the first interaction with them when you talk to their voice bot, which is very different from if you were calling like their live agent to make a booking where you hear the call center. You know, why have that? Why not evoke something like the experience that you're going to get when you finally get to the resort? You know, all of these things are available to us. And I think, you know, to even develop that further, like, you know, for your Lingofest, I did an example which was Last year was somebody ordering a pizza, and I added various sounds. And I came to that idea because I was thinking that, in terms of, I'm no linguist, but I'm very, I'm constantly trying to learn about it. But we have the concept of pragmatics. And what I was trying to, and I think I would like to leave that open so that you can summarize what pragmatics is. But what I was trying to do with those sounds was to contextualize the experience so that you don't have to explicitly use words to say, okay, you've made your order and we're now preparing it. So you hear chopping, or we've made your order and it's now gone into the oven. You can hear those sounds, and that gives this kind of framing, like reinforcement to the conversation of, we're at this point, this is the context, now you've moved on, the context is here. And do you see where I'm coming from with that? It was it was an idea I wanted to develop.
No, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. I mean,